Our first speaker this evening is Major Dave Gotez, or Major Dave as he's commonly known on Facebook and throughout the state. Major Dave is a native of Raleigh, North Carolina, and is a retired U.S. Army officer. He currently holds the position of Commander of American Legion Post number 187 in Wake Forest, North Carolina. He is a fellow at the Institute of Political Leadership in Greensboro, a member at large of the Franklin County GOP Executive Committee, and is a recipient of the North Carolina Civilian Victorious Service Medal, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, and for his continued support of the National Guard since his retirement. He is self-employed as an international business development consultant and lives with his wife Joanne in Youngsville, North Carolina. Please welcome Major Dave.
Thank you and good evening. It's great to be here with you. No speech, no graphics. Who am I? Why am I here? Folks, we're not that different, you and I. You and I both hold the most important position in this country. We are citizens. And we are at the top of the power curve, not the bottom. I'm here because, like you, I know it's important to be involved in what's going on in this country. This is a new group, and I promised Brandon and Stacey back when they started this several months ago, if there was anything I could ever do to help them kick off, to be successful, just to let me know. So the wife and I drove up from Raleigh today to be with you on this first rally that you're holding. We're grateful for all of the turnout. Everybody who took the time to show up. They asked me to talk about the marriage amendment. If I start speaking in favor of the marriage amendment, I feel kind of like I'm preaching to the choir. So what I'd like to share with you, though, are some of the things that may help you make the argument in favor of the marriage amendment. I've spent numerous hours on Facebook on the various Tea Party pages having conversations over this very issue, not with the liberal Democrats, but with our fellow conservatives. And it's quite shocking to hear some of the arguments that they make against the marriage amendment. I carry a couple books with me whenever I'm in public. One of them is our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. These two documents are inseparable. When Abraham Lincoln said that the philosophy in the classroom in one generation becomes the philosophy in government in the next, he wasn't kidding. And the young kids, the under 40 crowd out there right now, unfortunately, too many of them have been taught something entirely different about these two documents than what you and I were taught growing up. I compare these two documents to the two documents that our political parties have. They have a platform and they have a plan of organization. The platform defines the values that the party is going to promote and stand for. The plan of organization defines how they're going to organize and structure the group in order to achieve those goals that they set forth. In this country, our Declaration of Independence is our platform. There is no ambiguity that there is or is not a supreme being, because our very inalienable rights were claimed in his name in that declaration. And the Constitution became the implementing instructions. What does the Constitution do? It is the voice of the people putting limitations on their government as to what their government can and cannot do and what values it will promote or reject. The other book I carry is our North Carolina Constitution. And I would like to read to you, just very briefly, the preamble, because it has some very interesting words in it. I'll find it here in just a second. Bear with me. My paperclip disappeared. Here we go. I want to read this to you, and I want to explain to you why I believe it is critically important that we all know and understand this. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to me, this is my birthright. Not only as an American citizen, but as a citizen of North Carolina. This is a treasure that those who came before us fought and died for to bless us with. And if we fail to ever appreciate that blessing for what it truly is, then our whole form of government crumbles. We, the people of the state of North Carolina, grateful to Almighty God, the sovereign ruler of nations, for the preservation of the American Union and the existence of our civil, political, and religious liberties, and acknowledging our dependence upon Him for the continuance of those blessings to us and our posterity, due for the more certain security thereof, and for the better government of this state, ordain and establish this Constitution. Now, we have an amendment before us on the ballot that defines what marriage is. Personally, I think it should have been unnecessary, because going back to the other document, there are certain self-evident truths on which this country was founded. There are positions, there are opinions, there are values that no one has ever really questioned throughout history. And with rare exception, marriage has always been one man and one woman. It has been so in every century, in every country, on every continent on the face of this earth since the dawn of man. And I submit to you that it is only man's arrogance that leads him to believe that he can somehow change that definition to suit his modern day instincts. So what can we do to make this argument on behalf of the marriage amendment? The first thing is have the conversation. You can't change any hearts and minds if you aren't having the conversation. When everybody becomes my friend on Facebook, that's the first thing I say, welcome to the conversation. Because that's what it's all about. That's what we each do. A lot of people, you call yourselves the Tea Party. There's a lot of concern about, well, you're not supporting the Tea Party platform because that's all about limited government and personal responsibility and freedom of choice. Well, that's true. There are over 170 different groups just like this one in this room tonight across the state of North Carolina. That's just in North Carolina. There's a lot of diversity among them, and that's a great thing. But the issue of the limited government is being lost, is being twisted. Dan Forrest and Dr. Eichmann both kind of alluded to this, of how the lexicon, the language is being perverted in a way that was never meant to be used before. What is more limiting to government than the people telling their government through their Constitution what it can and cannot do? But Major Dave, you're just trying to impose your personal religious values on everybody else. I wish it was that simple, but it's not. Because, folks, my values weren't just made up in a vacuum of my mind. They came to me through my parents and my grandparents, through my neighbors and my teachers. These are those time-honored, self-evident truths. And if we ever undermine the first one of those self-evident truths, it's no longer self-evident, and they are all at risk. So when they argue with you, oh, you just want big government to come in and tell us how to live every aspect of our lives, they're trying to make it sound like Agenda 21. President John Adams said, our Constitution was designed only for a moral and a religious people. And why is that? Because moral and religious people are self-regulating. We control our own behavior according to accepted norms. We don't need government to come in and run our lives. So you can see how they're beginning to twist it now. The very thing that gives us our liberty and freedom, which is our personal relationship as well as our collective relationship with that Creator, is what makes those rights inalienable. We are standing up for our personal liberty by supporting this time-honored definition of marriage. The definition already exists as a statute in the state of North Carolina. It was passed by the legislature some time ago. But as a statute, it is a law that can be interpreted by a judge or changed by the legislature. at some point, a judge could have a case come before him, and he would have the option to rule this statute is unconstitutional. Folks, it would only be unconstitutional because we didn't vote to put it in there. Once we do, and this amendment passes, it is by definition constitutional because it's part of the Constitution. And that's why this is so critical. So going back to having the discussion, don't let the conversation distract you from those key points. Keep in mind what this amendment actually does. This is our voice as the citizens of North Carolina telling our government this is what you will do. And I pray to God that enough people vote for this on May 8th, that this is no longer an issue. Now, I know some of you have had conversations like that too. They had said talk for 20 minutes and stuff, but I came to have a conversation because that's where we really get the biggest bang for the buck. And anything on out here is probably just a matter of opinion anyway. Some of you have been involved in some of those conversations, so I would like to do what I came to do, which is to help you in some way do what you do and do it better. And if I can do that by helping you get answers to some of these questions, then I think that will have been the biggest contribution. The wife and I live just northeast of Raleigh. And so we drove up today and we're going to drive back tonight. Folks, I can tell you right now, it's already been worth it because you've got a great group here and you will continue to grow. So let me ask you, have you been involved in any conversation? What are the arguments you're hearing? Maybe your neighbor hasn't heard what you're hearing and participating in. And this is how we get this dialogue going. So has anybody got a particular point? Maybe you've seen it in the press, something that's been put out, some legal scholar or something has issued an opinion on it or why it's not a good thing. Yes, Stacey? It's discrimination. We discriminate in our laws every single day. If God has no place in our governance, then all the Declaration of Independence really needed to say was, Dear God, thanks for the rights and freedom. We'll take it from here. And we would have been left living according to the laws of man. All our laws are based on morality at some point or another. We have the duty to discriminate between what is morally acceptable and what is morally unacceptable. And this is exactly what we're doing right here. We are putting down and sending a message to the public. Now, this is what North Carolina stands for. Yeah, but they can get married in Massachusetts, and they can move to North Carolina. Well, that's all fine and well. North Carolina is not obliged to recognize the laws of Massachusetts. It's called the right of self-determination. It's called the 10th Amendment. And those powers not delegated to the federal government are left to the states or to the people. And again, what stronger voice than the voice of the people? Are we sanctioning the gay lifestyle? No. They still have every other freedom. The amendment makes it very clear that this in no way impacts private contracts or the court's ability to rule on those contracts. They just can't call it marriage. They can still go and do and live together everything that any other married couple would want to do. They just can't call it marriage. It's that simple. There is a greater good, and I heard Dan Forrest refer to this, that and they seize on that. Well, you're just saying this because of the greater good, and you're making the individual the victim of the masses. Well, folks, that's a part of our form of government. It does protect the individual from the masses to a great degree. But by the same token, our form of government protects the majority from the radical desires of a minority. And this is where we get the balance of the ballot box. Does anybody else have a question? Yes. Wait. Right. Her point was that if you are a constitutionalist, and make sure I say this right, then why are you promoting a change to the Constitution? That was one. Okay, let me address that first. If the Founding Fathers had not, in their foresight and wisdom, foreseen the need for changes, they would not have structured an amendment process into that very document. They would not have said that forth because they knew that there were things that could arise that they would not have foreseen. They had lived that because nothing that they experienced when they came to this country was foretold and known. Everything was an unknown to them. And they built it out of nothing. I saw somebody say the other day, that remember that the Ark was built by amateurs and the Titanic was built by professionals? Well, our government was built by amateurs. The United Nations was built by professionals. And therein we can see the difference. And this is carrying it all back to the voice of you and me as we people. Because we are the ultimate voice in this country as long as we stand up and exercise it. If we stay home and be quiet, we lose that authority. And the second part was, if marriage is so sacred, then why are so many people divorcing? To me, that's another attempt to divert the issue. If so many banks are failing and going out of business, then why does the government allow banks at all? You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There has never been a society on the face of this earth that has ever embraced the homosexual lifestyle and survived and prospered from it. Period. If it was so normal and so acceptable, why wasn't this discussion being had 200 years ago or 500 years ago in all the other societies that have been on this earth? Those who have embraced it have fallen and fallen quickly. Folks, when they fall, it doesn't matter why. You ever heard the phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions? And I've often said, we're going to liberate ourselves from our own rights if we aren't careful. Because the libertarians out there that believe not only in limited social government, but in the broadest possible definition of personal freedom, at some point step away from that issue of personal responsibility that the Tea Party champions. There are rules to how we live our lives. There can be genuine debate among well-meaning men over just what those rules are. But the point is, there have to be rules. If the ability to redefine marriage to include same-sex partners is ever allowed in the state, on what moral basis would we ever object to the legalization of polygamy? On what moral basis would we ever object to the marriage to underage children? If the parent says it's okay, why not? I happen to know a girl in Tennessee. She was married at the age of 12. She was totally uncontrollable by her parents. They found an older gentleman, but they married her off. She was pregnant at 13, a mother at 14, and had 3 children by the time she was 19. She's 35 years old now. She's never held a job. She's lived entirely off of government support. Folks, the breakdown in morality in this country will bankrupt us. And that will have nothing to do with the banks or the economy or inflation or anything else. And we are opening that door. There's something called the doctrine of unintended consequences. And I've always said there were 3 bodies of knowledge that we wrestle with in life. There's what we know. There's what we know we don't know. And then there's what we don't even suspect. And it's usually that third category of knowledge that does us the most damage. So, is there another? Yes.
I have a close friend who is violently opposed to the marriage amendment, and we've been going around and around about it, and she brought up an interesting point. When I told her, the argument as far as I was concerned is that the Bible, it's marriage is between one man and one woman. She threw a Bible verse back at me and said that if a bride is not a virgin at the time of her betrothal or wedding, then she should be put to death by stone.
did not quote scripture in my argument for a simple reason. It's not in here. The successful argument is based on our founding documents, because that's our birthright. Yes, it is based on a supreme being, and we can disagree over what name he's called. But make no mistake that he is the God of Abraham and Moses. And it is his 10 commandments that were set down that our laws are based on. Now, to quote scripture like that brings in all manner of totally unrelated things to my way of thinking. And most of them that do that want to look at the Old Testament, not the New Testament. However, when you get into the New Testament, then they start and say, oh, well, you're just trying to make this a Christian nation. And the Treaty of Tripoli of 1791 or whatever says quite clearly, ratified by our Congress, that we are not a Christian nation. Actually, that treaty was changed later and that statement was left out. But make no doubt, we are a Judeo-Christian nation. We have not been without our faults and flaws in this country. But after 236 years, as messy and difficult as our form of government is, it's better than anything else that anybody on this planet has ever come up with. And 56 men got together around the table and sat down and put their heads together and built a republic. And that's one of the reasons I'm not concerned that deeply about how bad things could get in this country. Because I do know that no matter how bad they get, another 56 people can gather around the table and start all over again. But we have to go back to those same fundamental values. Now, Marita raised the issue of divorce. You raised the issue of whether the bride is a virgin or not. There are such things having to do with marriage that are clearly within the purview of the church. But does that mean that it's solely the church? If you look throughout history, there are only two institutions that man has ever created to regulate society: the church and the government. And the difference between any two is always in the balance of power between the two. And that's what we're fighting here today, balance of power between the church and the state. We, as believers, in support of our churches, can stand up in the public square and profess our values and do so through the political process. We do that as individuals, but we need the churches behind us. Many churches fear getting involved in political discourse. I can understand their reluctance to endorse specific candidates, but not on issues like this. There is no person ever elected to a public office in this country that's been able to walk up to the halls of government and park their values at the door. They don't do it. We can't, and we should not expect our elected officials to do that. I want to segue, because I know Richard Alexander's coming up, he's running for the superintendent of public instruction. And I go back to that Abraham Lincoln comment: the philosophy in the classroom in one generation becomes the philosophy of government in the next. That's where we turn this country around. The vote on May 8th is critical, but it doesn't win the war. The outcome of the election in November is critical, but it doesn't win the war. As Reagan said, we're only one generation away from tyranny. We don't pass it to our kids in the bloodstream. It is our duty to prepare that next generation to pick up this same battle that we're fighting today. There's nothing we can do to keep them from that. It will fall to them. And the best that we can do is to take the stand now, set the example to enshrine our values in our state constitution so that it does not become within the purview of government to make that decision for us. And I ask you all to vote for the marriage amendment on May 8th and encourage your friends to do the same. I'll be here afterwards and be glad to talk with you individually, one-on-one. Thank you for having me, and I wish the Allegheny Tea Party the best and future success as you continue to grow as a group of influence up here in the Great Mountains of North Carolina.